will be maybe beige for a more earthy event.
Do you want to say something, Jim?
The piece you're sitting on.
Okay.
By Paula might be performance by.
All right, guys. I think we're gonna get started. So welcome to Cake again. Thanks everyone for coming out. And as usual, a little introduction to Cake, which is just that we're a totally donation-based workshop. This is actually week 18 that we've been doing this now. I know, which is crazy. So we started the first Wednesday of this year. And basically, yeah, it's a bunch of tips and tactics and hopefully really easily implementable into your own projects and businesses for just how to get things done. There's a lot of business advice out there that's really vague and unclear and kind of wishy-washy. And our goal with this is just to give you a lot of concrete tactics that'll actually help you just in day-to-day life as well as day-to-day business, regardless of the scope of it. And today is a great topic, which is more than just business related as well, but it's on public speaking and just on presenting in general. And I guess just before we get started and I toss things over to Ashkahn, just a reminder, if you do want to donate, we have a little donation box over here. And we also have Square, so you can donate via card as well. Nice. Yeah, which is great. And on our website. Yeah, you can give us money in many ways. So, with that said, here's Ashkahn to talk more about talking.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashkahn. A little bit about myself. I'm another one of the founders of Float On, the float tank place. Most of my actual kind of rigorous training comes from acting and theater. So a lot of my kind of speech ideas and techniques are based off of kind of scripted plays and working from that direction. I also did a lot of improv, so I also have a lot of practice with just making stuff up. So hopefully the range of advice I'm giving will kind of be applicable to any speeches you're making, from any range of like making stuff up on the spot to like fully formed pre-written speeches. I was going to start this presentation by talking about how public speaking is like everyone's biggest fear, and that some studies show that it's actually more fear than death itself. But then when I went to look that up online and see if I could actually find those studies, the only thing I found was a really scathing article about how everyone begins speeches with that cliche, and that like all the studies about like public speaking fear are all kind of like vague and really ambiguous. So I guess I won't start with that. Regardless, I did find some things on. It's called glossophobia, is the fear of public speaking. And as you can imagine, like getting in front of people and talking is just kind of nerve-wracking, which I'm sure everyone has experienced from being asked to speak at some event at some point at some time. What I want to say about fear or nervousness in terms of kind of preparing for public speaking is, first of all, that you better get used to it, because it's never going to go away. It's not one of those things that just kind of like eventually, becomes like an amateur type thing. You're just always nervous before you give a speech. There was never a play I did in all of my years of theater where I was not nervous before I was going on stage. And if you're not, then you're really just like desensitized to the whole thing and probably shouldn't be speaking anyway. So get used to that feeling beforehand. But I do think that it can actually be useful if you manage to funnel it kind of the right way. When I was in college, I had a professor, and a student in our class asked him what is the best way to prepare for going on stage. And his response was 2 shots of tequila and 1 shot of espresso. I think that's a really good way to kind of feel like, think about how you want your body to react, and you can use kind of the adrenaline that's pumped into you from being really nervous beforehand to kind of get yourself into that zone. And what I think helps make that transition for people is confidence. Confidence is hugely important in public speaking. Public speaking is basically an act of persuasion. You're trying to convince people to do something, whether it's to like rally people together, or to motivate people, or just to get people to have a good time, or accept an idea, or like change their perception, or to like buy your product. Like all of these things are things that you're trying to convince someone to do. And if you're not confident while you're doing it, then no one's going to believe you. So confidence is really key. And if you don't have it, you're just going to have to pretend like you have it until you naturally figure out where to find it inside of yourself. I think confidence is what's going to turn like the stress of public speaking into eustress, or stress that your body uses to kind of like achieve peak performance. Most of the advice that you see on public speaking online and everything is basically just tactics to help people gain confidence. The classic imagine everyone in their underwear is just kind of a way to like shift the power, to make you feel like you're in a kind of higher status position than the audience and to give you a little bit of confidence. A lot of the things you're going to see online are about how to kind of like emotionally gain confidence, things like just thinking positive thoughts and like visualizing yourself, giving these presentations and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk too much about those, mostly because that is like a lot of the information that's out there. I also think it's a little more like specific person to person and harder to generalize. My own personal method for gaining confidence is just by instilling precise and deliberate techniques into the way that I present information. I like have practiced some technical skills that I use that actually apply to the act of speaking itself. And I feel that like when you kind of get those down, it gives you some real concrete place to draw confidence from and something very like, a foundation to stand on basically. Before I go into the specifics of the skills themselves, I do want to encourage everyone to think about speaking and all these skills that I say much more like a sport. It's something that can be practiced and can be built and is not going to come just like right off the bat. And the more you practice it, the more you're going to make incremental improvements on it. So thinking of it like training is a really good way to think about public speaking. The first thing I want to talk about is voice. Voice is obviously really fundamental to speaking, because if you didn't have a voice, then you would be having a terrible presentation. So you need to be heard. Volume is really key. Making sure that you're projecting to the back of the room, that everyone in the room can hear you. If you're not doing that, then nothing else you do matters at all. Doesn't matter how well your speech is written, doesn't matter how much you practice. If people can't hear you, then like that's it. Like nothing else is getting across. So make sure that you're speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. There's better ways to train your voice. Speaking loud can be kind of difficult. There's rooms this size which make things a little bit easier. There's huge auditoriums you can be speaking at. There's a vast number of different like spaces and acoustics that are going to make things easier or more difficult. So there's definitely things you can do to help boost your voice and make sure you're being heard. One great thing is to see if you can actually see the room you're speaking in beforehand. If you can go the day before or even a little bit before, it's actually really helpful. Just knowing kind of like how loud you will need to speak in a room, knowing if there's a microphone or not. Maybe you don't even need to worry about projection, Just seeing the room beforehand also clears up a lot of like unknowns in your head and kind of like misty areas that I think can really fuel that nervousness. Your voice is very much like a muscle, and is something that can be trained and built up and made stronger in very practical ways. And the foundation for all of that is breath. Breath is huge. It's it's fundamental. If you're not breathing, then you're gonna die basically. So you gotta remember to breathe. Breathing is super super important. When you get nervous and when you hit that zone where fight or flight is kicking in, your body's natural reaction is to start taking really quick, really shallow breaths. And that is just terrible for speaking. Like you cannot support your voice if you're taking really shallow breaths. So you want to remember to breathe slowly, to breathe deeply, and to breathe correctly. What do I mean by breathe correctly? If everyone actually just takes their hands and puts them just like this on their body, and just take like a really big breath in, as big of a breath as you can, fill your lungs up. Now let that go and feel, where did that go? Where did that breath like go into your body? You can try it again. Which one of those hands is kind of puffing up?
The bottom one.
The bottom one for you?
Yeah.
What did you guys feel? Your chest? That's great. So a lot of people breathe into their chest kind of by default. When you tell people to take a big deep breath, you feel your lungs up, your whole shoulders rise, your chest kind of opens up. It's a very natural place to kind of imagine your breath going because that's where your lungs are. It's actually not really the natural way that you're supposed to breathe. Into your stomach is actually great. That's how we were born to breathe. If you ever look at a baby sleeping, which I'm sure you all do all the time, their stomachs are just like inflating and contracting like crazy. Like that's where people breathe. And it's where you really want to breathe if you're thinking about trying to support your breath and to support your voice and to really be able to like project. It can feel a little unnatural at first, but after a little bit of practice, you'll definitely get it. Just putting your hand on your stomach like you just did and breathing in and focusing on like pushing your hand out and not moving your chest at all is a great way to practice. It won't feel normal at first, but eventually like You'll learn to just kind of push that hand in and out. You'll learn to put your breath into your stomach. What you're doing is you're expanding your lungs and you're kind of pushing your diaphragm down instead of like pushing your ribs out.
Really healthy for you.
Yeah, and it's great for you. It's like how we're supposed to breathe. So it's like really good for your body. You'll feel a lot better. Like, yeah, breathing naturally is amazing. It also,
is also really great.
yeah.
If you aren't congested, of course.
Yeah, it's really good. It also calms you down. It's a really great way to calm you down is taking big breaths into your stomach. And it also just makes you seem like more confident as well as having like a really strong voice that is kind of like well-founded. Once you do that, make sure that you actually have some good posture, whether you're standing or sitting, because your voice has to come from down here in your stomach and move its way up kind of the chimney of like your vocal, your throat and everything, and then out your mouth. So make sure that whole kind of, you can actually just picture like a big chimney and make sure you're not bent over and kind of like putting a bend into where your voice is supposed to go. Also make sure that now that you know how to breathe, that you're using it. I see a lot of people like start a speech and they go, okay, so, and I'm like, you just blew all the breath out of your air before you started talking. Like, take a huge breath and then use that breath to speak. Don't blow it all out and then start speaking. So that's really important. Your voice is basically just breath that's vibrating in different parts of your body. So your voice is completely dependent on your breath. Once you really get your breath working, your voice is going to work a lot better. Again, voice is just like a muscle. You can train it and you can warm it up, which is really important and really great to do before you give any sort of like presentations. Our body has a bunch of different resonators throughout them, which is how we make the different sounds that we can make. Your chest is a big resonator. Your hard palate, your skull, your nasal cavities, these are all different areas that we form different noises. You can test it out too. If you just make a really low like sound and put your hand on your chest, you'll feel your whole chest vibrating. Feel free to try it too. If you want. And then if you make like really nasal noises and put your hands on your nose, like you feel it, like that part of your face is vibrating. So these are all areas that can be warmed up. And warming them up just kind of loosens them up. It gets them ready. It allows your voice to be stronger. It allows you to not like lose your voice after you give a presentation. So warming up, just like sports, can be really helpful and really important. There's a lot of exercises for warming your voice up and stuff, and I won't go into that fully right now, but I will give you some links to that. Your mouth and your lips and your tongue, these are all also muscles, literally this time. And they're all also important in speech making, so also things that you can warm up. Dictation is something that your mouth needs to warm up to. Otherwise, you just gargle your words all the time. There you go. So good ways to warm up your tongue and your mouth and practice dictation are things that you already know, like tongue twisters. Stuff like that is actually great for just getting your mouth ready to not trip over itself. An important note about tongue twisters. We use that a lot, I'm sure you know, like some, and a lot of times people will just kind of hit those first letters of every word, because that's usually kind of the trippy one in a tongue twister, like to sit in solemn silence on a dull, dark dock. But really what's important is making sure you're hitting the end of the words too. You want to be hitting every part of that word, vowels and consonants, really get as much as you can out of it. To sit in solemn silence on a dull, dark dock. You know, hitting the end of those words is really going to help work your consonants and make sure your words aren't just like dropping off and not really being able to be understood as they're coming out of your mouth. So really think about dictation in a kind of more well-rounded sense. Hydration is also important. Drinking water is great, like your voice and all your vocal cords and everything need water to like, you know, be their full size and be strong and not damage your voice as you're trying to speak loudly. A lot of hydration is best to do 24 hours beforehand, so don't just try to like chug a glass of water right before you speak and be like, yeah, this is great. If you do want to drink water right before you're about to give a presentation, don't drink cold water because that's going to contract your vocal cords and just make them a lot stiffer. So if you do want to drink water, lukewarm or even slightly warm water is really good. Some more technical tips: don't clear your throat. They're like, it's actually terrible for your vocal cords. A much better way is kind of a weird like kind of noise that will slowly help like loosen up anything in your throat that won't like damage your vocal cords or make everything rough as you're trying to speak. All this work, all this like vocal work and these exercises is a really deep rabbit hole that you can get down. There's just like infinite amount of work you can do with your voice in terms of like training everything. You get to the point where you're really trying to distinguish your like uhs from your uhs, and like it's just like hours and hours you can spend on it. If anyone is interested in looking into it, Kristen Linklater is a really good kind of expert in the field. She has a book called Freeing the Natural Voice. You can pick one of those up. There'll be like a link to it on the blog or on the Cake website, so you guys can find it there. And that has a lot of just like hands-on exercises. Voice classes are amazing. Voice is a great thing to do with different actual experts, because it is sometimes hard to read in a book, just kind of like the difference between these really subtle phonetic things. So having an actual teacher who's just like, no, like you're too much in your nose is really helpful. And it's actually like makes your body feel really good. Like breathing and using your voice well like frees up emotions, and like I don't know, it's really interesting work, and feel like you just feel amazing afterwards. So I definitely recommend looking into some voice work. At the very least, there's some good online resources for just a list of like a good warm-up, a 10-minute warm-up you can do before you go on to speak. That's just gonna like do a quick warm-up for your voice, for your breath, and for your dictation. The next thing I want to talk about is speech. So now that we have kind of voice wrangled in a little bit, how you're actually using your voice. First of all, slow down. You don't have to race through everything. Another one of those fight or flight responses is that you just speed up and want to get all that information out lightning fast. So don't be afraid to slow down. You just kind of have to fight your adrenaline a little bit there. Don't be afraid to pause. Pausing is very natural. It's not as uncomfortable as you think from a presenter's point of view to take a little pause. It makes you seem like more confident in what you're saying, and like you kind of have a sense of what's going on. It also gives people in the audience a chance to kind of take a moment to process the information that you've been saying. Like what your goal is with the presentation is to like hopefully organize a huge amount of information and condense it and like give it as a nice package to people. So giving people chances in the middle there to kind of take a moment and process what's going on is really helpful. Slowing down is also great for larger venues because the way your voice travels, you're actually going to be harder to understand at your normal talking pace further in the room. So slow down even a little more than sounds normal to you, because as your voice gets further and further back, it's going to become harder and harder to understand. So that's going to help a lot with clarity. Emphasis is also really important. Emphasis can completely change the meaning of a sentence. And it's something to pay attention to as you're speaking. Really try to make a conscious effort to decide what words you're emphasizing in a sentence. This applies a lot more to like if you have a pre-planned speech, kind of going through and figuring out which words are really meant to be emphasized. Each sentence is really like kind of a vehicle to express like a single thought, so make sure you're thinking about how you're sending that message out. A good way is to choose one word that you think is the most important in a sentence, one or two words that are next to each other, and have the rest of the sentence work to support that word. You know, really like help things launch into it and take things down. Like if I have a sentence like float tanks are going to take over the world. There's a lot of different emphasis that I can put to make a lot of different meanings with that sentence. There's like weaker words I could choose, like float tanks are going to take over the world. It's like, okay, great. And then you could say like float tanks are going to take over the world, and it's much more like a challenge or like a rebuttal to someone. Float tanks are going to take over the world. Like, you know, it's much more of like a grand vision, or float tanks are going to take over the world. It's much more of like, you know, this idea that we're trying to spread further. So there's a lot of different meaning you can kind of get out of what word you choose to emphasize in which sentence. Verbs are always a great place to look at if you're trying to find a word to emphasize. Verbs kind of like pack that punch already, so emphasizing them makes things even more exciting. They're also usually some of the most important words in a sentence, so verbs is always a good default to kind of look to. Nouns is kind of right after that, like a higher one step down on the hierarchy. Look towards nouns as good words to emphasize. You don't need to emphasize pronouns, he, she, and it. Our ear picks up on those really naturally. So if you ever find yourself in a sentence like really pushing those he's or something like that, it's a really easy word to default to. A lot of people default towards emphasizing pronouns, but it's just unnecessary. You're like wasting your emphasis basically if you emphasize a pronoun, because our ears just pick it up really easily, and there's other words that you could be like conveying information with. So that's a good little track to watch out for in yourself. There are other fun tricks and kind of exceptions to these rules. If you have some sort of contrast that you're setting up, you can emphasize that contrast itself to help get that message across. If you're saying things like, sales were down 300% last year, and now they're up 600% this year, really hit that down and that up as like a comparison, because that's what you're trying to say. You're trying to say like it was down and now it's up. So figure out the kind of structure of your message, and you can emphasize words to reinforce that. Intonation or inflection is also really good for conveying information. That's just the variation of pitch in your voice. So whoop, or woo, that's all inflection or intonation. It gives a lot of subtle cues to your brain. It's a lot of stuff that we don't think we're processing, but is going on kind of a lower level, is inflection and intonation. To give you an example of this, if I had a list of groceries and I said, oh yeah, I went to the store and I bought some apples and some bananas and some pears and some candy and a turtleneck. That's really odd, you know what I mean? Because I'm dropping my voice at the end of each one of those. As opposed to if I were saying I went to the store and I bought some apples and some bananas and some oranges and some pears and some candy. You're using your voice to carry people along and to let people know what to listen to. When your voice goes up like that, when you have an upward inflection, that's a cue to the listener's brain that there's more coming. And when you have a downward inflection, that's a cue to people that that thought is over and that they should go back and clump the last piece of information and kind of process it through their brain. It's going on all the time. So if you dropping inflection in the middle of your sentences, you're just cutting people off and kind of making it hard for them to follow your train of thought. So think about that. Think about kind of putting it at the right spots at the end of paragraphs. If you have a downward inflection at the end of each one of your sentences, it's going to make your speech seem really separated to people as they're trying to listen to it. There's other little things like parentheticals, which are like a little thought separated by commas in the middle of a sentence. I wrote a sentence, my best friend Jimmy, the one you met at the party, is such an asshole. So the one you met at the party is the parenthetical there. So this is just a really good example of how you can use inflection to carry people along with you. Is for parentheticals, kind of think of like a motorcycle ramp where you kind of toss your inflection up and then sneak that parenthetical in and then catch it on its way back down. So how I would want to say that is, my best friend Jimmy, the one you met at the party, is such an asshole. Right? So you're tossing it up, you're getting the information in, and then you catch it yourself. You're doing an alley-oop to yourself, basically, and trying to get that information across. So that just shows you how little inflection like that can really help give people cues that they don't even know they're getting. You are like a conductor for people's attention while you're giving a presentation, so make sure you know how to use that towards your advantage. A lot of this technical stuff is obviously not something that you want to constantly be thinking about as you're giving a presentation. You don't want to be up there speaking being what kind of inflection should I use to end this sentence? Because that just can't be what you're thinking about. It's going to be way too confusing and hard to think about what you're saying. So again, just like sports, this is stuff that if you practice, it's going to become ingrained in you. You're going to build a muscle memory for it. And when you do go give a presentation and stand in front of people, it's going to start to happen naturally, and it's just going to happen in the background, and you won't even have to think about it. That's really the goal with all this stuff, is to practice it a bunch so that when you do want to use it, it's just happening on its own automatically. I want to talk a little bit about just the content of presentations that you're giving. Structure is really important. Really take some time to think about structure and how you're structuring your speech, the order of information that you're presenting. Like I said, you're presenting people a condensed amount of information when you're giving someone a speech, so having a good, strong structure is going to help them follow along with you. It's going to help them not get lost in the information that you're presenting. A good structure will also help persuade people. This is an act of persuasion, so if you have a good structure, you're going to have them follow your thought one to one to one to one until they reach the conclusion that you wanted them to reach. So structure can really help you emphasize the point you're making by just kind of bringing their brain along with your train of thought. A good structure will also help people remember what you said after your presentation. If you think back on a presentation and you think about how it started and you can really logically follow where it went from there, you're going to be able to remember the whole thing. If it was garbled and all over the place and information was being thrown out left and right for different topics, it's going to be really hard to remember like exactly what the person was saying or follow kind of the full bulk of information that they presented. The only other thing I want to say about the actual content of your presentations is that you should be passionate about what you're talking about. Passion and enthusiasm will make a lot of the stuff that I've been saying just happen naturally. You won't even have to think about it if you're really excited to tell people about what you're telling them. Also, if you're not passionate about what you're talking about, then you probably just shouldn't be talking about it. So definitely important to care about what you're saying. A few small notes about your body. Posture, like I mentioned before, is going to help support your breath a lot, whether you're standing or sitting. Make sure you're not like really slunched over, or hunching your shoulders down, or collapsing your chest so you can't really fully breathe into your lungs. In terms of eye contact with the audience, try to look up from your notes. There's a difference between what they call hard focus and soft focus. What that means is hard focus is when you're actually focusing on something really specific, like as I'm like looking everyone in the eyes right now, that's a real hard focus, right? A soft focus is if I was just like generally kind of staring off into the distance without an actual specific point that I'm looking at. And people can tell. We can really look at people's eyes and know if they have a hard or a soft focus. Soft focus is when you get kind of that glazed over look. If you don't want to look people in the eyes, if that is making you nervous, like just choose something, a red dot right in between the chairs, like something specific though, so that you're actually keeping that kind of like ferocity and intention in your eyes. Also make sure to look around and kind of address everyone. Don't just stare off at one single point the entire time. That can be really impersonal. Feel free to use gestures with your hands. It's really exciting and grabs people's attention. Feel free to move around and be dynamic. Don't feel like you're trapped behind a podium. If you want to point at something in a big slide presentation you have, walk over and point at it. You have a stage and you should use it. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was if you do have a slide presentation or some sort of PowerPoint that you're also trying to present with, because that's usually a lot of times what people include with kind of different business proposals or kind of public speeches like that. The first thing is don't forget your rules of design that we learned in a previous cake. Don't just throw design out the window because all of a sudden you're making a slideshow for a couple people. It's really important. It's how you communicate. It's how information can be sent out effectively. So make sure to think about design as you're setting your slides up. Try to keep things really simple and really concise. Guy Kawasaki has a 10-20-30 rule, which is you should have no more than 10 slides. Your presentation should be no longer than 20 minutes, and you should use no more or no less than a 30-point font. And basically, 10 slides because you don't want to just overburden them with all these slides and information that's going by. Don't be afraid to have your speech be short. Just have it be no longer than it needs to be to get the message across that you're trying to make. A short speech is no problem, but a short speech that's stretched out twice as long is terrible and horrible and excruciating. So always just, side on the side of being shorter. 30-point font is a great way to force yourself to keep things really concise and to the point on your slides. Don't write out huge sentences of information. Basically what you're doing if you do that is you're just fighting yourself for the audience's attention. As soon as you put that up, they're going to start reading that. It's going to sound similar to what you're saying. They can read faster than you're talking, and there's just this weird kind of separation that's going on, and everyone is really distracted. So don't be tempted to put huge just lines and lines of information. Much more effective are just a couple words that the kind of sum up the point you're trying to make. Numbers, if you have numbers, numbers are hard to keep in your head if you're just presenting them to people in a speech. So you can throw up kind of those 1 or 2 or 3 key numbers that you're saying just as a number behind to kind of help people not have to worry about storing that in their short-term memory. Images, if you can find images that kind of represent what you're talking about, even better. Just one less thing that is actually working to reinforce you and not working to distract people from what you're saying. The same thing goes for passing out papers. If you have a pamphlet or if you have photos you want to show people or anything that's going along with your presentation, be really careful about passing it out right at the beginning of your speech, because you're doing the same thing. You're just splitting people's attention. If everyone has this piece of paper in front of them, they're going to be worried about reading that and listening to you, and you're just like, you're fighting yourself, basically. Same thing with like references to books or websites that you bring up. Always mention that they're accessible somewhere else, so that people don't have to worry about taking notes or like, feel like they're missing out on it. Make sure to let people know to like not worry and just sit back and listen to what you're saying. If you want any more information on good slides and presentations, and this link will also be available for you online. A guy named Gar Reynolds, I think is his name, or how you pronounce it, wrote a book called Presentation Zen. He's also just got his own website, garreynolds.com. He had a lot of great information on slideshows and presentation tips, and just really good key points for keeping this real simple and to the point, and kind of utilized for business presentations. So that's a little bit about slides. The last thing I wanted to say was practice. Just like anything else, like practice is going to be how you get better at any sort of public speaking. You can practice your speech itself, and specific practice for the actual thing that you're trying to present. Good ways to do that is to say it out loud. Even just one time of running through your speech out loud is tremendously helpful. It helps clear up a lot of the gray area between like the thoughts that you have and like the bullet points in your notes that you have while you're just kind of thinking it through your head. You won't even realize until you speak it out loud. You're like, oh, I had like no idea how I was going to get from this sentence to that sentence. So just going through it once will just make you like fall into all these pitfalls that you'll like be prepared for when you actually go to give a presentation. Speaking to a small group of your friends is always useful. Speaking to just one friend is like even harder to me than speaking to a group of people. It's just like so difficult. It's like you're in this little room and you're trying to give this like presentation, but there's just one person there and they're like smiling and you're looking right at them, and it's like so awkward and difficult that like going through that makes giving a presentation to a large group of people way easier. So I recommend, like, as terrible as it is, just sit one friend down and like say your speech to them. Even worse than that is recording yourself and then listening to it. It's just miserable. It's just the most miserable experience ever. But it's so useful. You will immediately start to hear your own speech patterns. Everyone has speech patterns. We all have our own little things that we do. And listening to yourself really like points that out to you. You're like, oh man, I dropped the end of every sentence I say. Like, okay, that's no good. So record yourself. Just sit down and like bear through it and listen to it and then like burn it so no one will ever hear it again. But, it's terrible, but it's really useful. So definitely do that. Another great thing is just to watch good speeches. Take other people's leads. TED Talks, if you don't know, TED Talks are amazing. That's just what they are. They're just people speaking on things that they're passionate about, ranging from like 5 to 20 minutes. It's just a website, tedtalks.com.
A lot of those get edited down even from like their full length to what gets shown on the website. So it's kind of like the like condensed awesome version of what was already an awesome talk. So like really good to see like a really polished finished product for what it can be.
It's great. And basically it's just like the speakers of our age all have TED Talks out there somewhere because it's kind of like focused around speaking. So that's a great place to look for inspiration.
I like one of the suggestions is Presentation Zen.
Presentation Zen? Yeah.
That's that. You've written down?
Yeah.
That one's really good.
That one is great, yeah. And like I said, I will have some links to those up. Just Google like YouTube people that you like, like actors or other people who you respect, or like essays you've written. A lot of times they have speeches they've given somewhere. Listening to them is always really great. Commencement speeches is a great place to, like, if you're working more the kind of like fully formulated speech angle. There's lots of commencement speeches out there, and it's just like what people really focus on in terms of speaking a lot of the time, so that's great. Shakespeare? Shakespeare is really, people who perform Shakespeare well are very formulaic in the way that they present information. It's almost like presenting a different language to people. So you really got to hit those rules hard. You have to think about what words you're emphasizing, how you're using your inflection. Those things are really important when you're speaking Shakespeare. So watch some like really good Shakespeare performance, and you will see all the stuff I talked about fully fledged and in play. It's a really good way to like just catch the subtle cues of like how people speak and how to really effectively communicate. There's different speaking associations and online classes, things like Toastmasters International and Power Talk International, National Speakers Association. I found all of those just by looking at the Wikipedia page on public speaking, so you can find all those there. I haven't actually done any of them or looked too much into them, so I can't attest for their quality or exactly how useful they'll be. But it is nice to know that they exist and something you can look into if you want to go down that path. How else can you get practice in to speak? A great way is just to commit yourself to speak. Tell people that you're a speaker and book yourself gigs, and then you just have to. You have no choice because it's on the calendar, and so you're just forced to go up there and speak and make presentations. And that's a really good way to get some speaking time. You can just research things you're interested in and present them to your friends. Try to figure out a really good way to organize the information and sit your friends down and just be like, hey, I'm gonna tell you all about stem cells, and try to present that to them. I would be down if anyone just wants to research things and present them to me. Call me up. That sounds great. That'll give you a lot of practice.
I'm down too.
Some of the studies I did found on glossophobia also find that public speaking becomes a lot easier the more familiar you are with a group of people, and the more you're used to interacting and hearing them speak, which is pretty intuitive. So speaking to your friends or getting a speaking group together will definitely help with building that confidence up to begin with. Even things like giving toasts at parties, just every party you go to, give a big toast from now until the end of the month, and that'll be great for practicing speaking and just getting used to saying things on the fly. So yeah, you can speak all the time, whether it's annoying or not. It'll at least get some practice under your belt. So that's a lot of what I have to say on public speaking. To sum it all up really concisely, your voice is a muscle, so learn how to train it. Your speech is a tool, so learn how to wield it, and you are the conductor of the audience's attention, so don't lead them astray. All right, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Does anyone have any questions or anything off the top of their head?
I have an hour-long speech I'm going to be doing soon, and the one thing I'm wondering about is I kind of want to avoid doing a PowerPoint presentation because I feel like those sometimes they tend to attract, especially if it's a long presentation.
Yeah.
Because people eventually get bored when someone keeps staring at a screen. And so I'm wondering how much percentage of time I should devote to media, video, what percentage of time I should devote to actual elements of the information I'm presenting, and how much should I create so that they have something to come back to, a document that they can all read or
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of having what you're talking about accessible some way afterwards, just because it does take a lot of that pressure off of people to take constant notes and allows them to relax and just listen to you. I think that's great. If you don't want to do a PowerPoint the entire time, you can consider doing a PowerPoint just for one part of it. Take one little section of what you're talking about and make that into a PowerPoint, and then it's kind of fresh and exciting and helps put a little movement into the hour of the piece. You can also have real visual aids, take physical things and bring them out with you. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
If someone comes out and stage with real objects in their hands, it's not what you're expecting from a public speech, and definitely draws attention.
Yeah.
Just make sure you're moving around. You can also the more you speak to people, the more you'll really be able to get a feel for the kind of conversation that's going on between you and the audience at all times.
Yeah.
You can really tell when you have people or when you don't. There's times when you just look out and you know everyone's lost and not listening, and there's times when you just feel they're we're right with you. And it's something that your skills are you'll hone in on more and more the more you speak. So stuff like that will help you a lot with the flow.
You're gonna say?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, Guy Kawasaki's thing too of the 20 minutes for max time is also just human beings absorb bits of knowledge in 10 to 20 minute chunks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They seem to have this kind of wave of attention that goes for about that length of time. So one thing I found really useful for longer presentations too is really being able to break those up. With Cake, I just kind of tear through because I'm okay, you guys have to listen to me if you want this information. It's just so much to present. So this is a bad example of longer presentations in general. But yeah, if you just get Radio Lab too does a great job of that. A lot of radio, anything longer than a 15-minute kind of podcast or something usually does that really well. They'll have even little musical interludes for like 3 minutes or like 1 minute even in the middle there, and you're like, oh, why did they just do that? Like, they're not playing commercials, they're not doing anything. It's kind of this like break to give people time to process. So like maybe even breaking it up into kind of like 3 or 4 main chunks over the presentation, having like weird little interludes in there. Yeah, exactly, breaking into acts.
Yeah. I think it's probably the best thing is like just structure it so that I'm spending a certain amount of time with just media to inform them about it. I'm thinking like for an hour-long presentation, maybe like total 20 minutes of media, video and content images-wise, and then breaking that. It sounds like a really good idea. Break it down into chunks. So it's like a bunch of information and then just a bite, and a bunch of information and something.
Yeah, totally.
I can't do this. Right?
Yeah. I was gonna say, the visuals are really to break that up.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, thinking about it like a song is really good, you know, and like kind of the movement of like your entire speech is a great way to like visualize it. Yeah, singing songs in the middle of all your points is really good. Great. Does anyone else have questions on anything?
Yeah, what about like Q&A tips? When people have questions, anything idea for like, I don't know, like picking people and kind of rating that in?
A couple practical things. Give people a little warning, like that you're gonna stop Q&As. Like, okay, I'm gonna take 3 more questions or something. Usually helps to wrap things up. Try to like control. This is from an audience's point of view. Is I feel like Q&As a lot of times get out of hand with like one person's question. Like one person will ask something and the speaker will respond, and then it'll just like descend into this tangent of like all these people talking about that one thing, and me as an audience member, I'm just like, I want to hear about other stuff. Like I don't care about really delving into this one thing. So try to wrangle that in. Be a little forceful about moving on to new topics, or don't feel bad about like moving on and getting other questions answered. You can tell some people are really excited in the audience. People just like shoot their hands up and like those are probably good people to call on. Give yourself time to. A great way in an hour talk is to plan for 40 minutes and just plan on 20 minutes of like answering questions and having a bit of a discussion. Did you have a question?
I was just wondering if you had any specific advice for trailing off at the end of sentences, avoiding that, and addressing that.
It's really hard. It's really like just trailing off in sentences. It's a really natural inclination for people, and so it's one of the hardest habits to get out of. A lot of it is because you run out of breath. Is honestly what I think. Like a lot of the reason that people like trail their sentences is they just like they're halfway through and they realize like they don't have any like air left in them to finish their thought. So making sure to breathe correctly helps a lot. The video recording or the audio recording is really good because you'll just really hear it when you listen to it. And take some pre-made speech, like not even anything that you're presenting, like a monologue or anything like that, and only focus on that. Hold it in front of you. You don't need to memorize it. Just say it out loud and work on throwing the end of those sentences up, every single sentence, even if it sounds like really absurd. You can exaggerate it to begin with. Like, I went to the store and then I bought some pastries. Like, shoot those ends up. And just like overkill will kind of ingrain it into your body, into the point where eventually like it will be muscle memory and it will be something that you don't need to think about. Awesome. Well, great. I guess we're going to take a little break and then come back for
Absolutely. So
eating
take
some
about a
cake.
10-minute break, and then we'll come back for the workshop portion where we'll actually work on this stuff. And once again, we have our donation box, so feel free to toss in any donations in the meantime.
And I have a bunch of pamphlets summing up what I said that I'm going to put out now too, if anyone wants them.